Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Alexandra Dane from the University of Melbourne.
welcome and thanks for being with us. And is that a one plant that's quite long, as it were, in its reach, or is there
It's
more than one plant behind you?
it's one and a bit. It's one plant that is happy and one that I'm hiding that is desperately unhappy.
What's the opposite of a green thumb? Is it a brown
I
or something?
brown thumb. I don't know. That doesn't sound quite right. That plan is working beyond me. I that has a life of its own.
It
I
looks
don't
like
have
it
any
could take over
skill.
your office at any moment.
I'm hoping that's the goal.
Well, it's just if I were in your office and you asked me to look after your plants for a week, they would be brown very quickly. That's why I was saying
No, no,
brown thumb, yes.
I think that there is just you've got to trust the plant, They know what they want. A
Hmm.
bit of water, sunlight. I don't know what I'm doing. I inherited it as well from someone else. It was very small when I inherited it, so I feel very
Now,
lucky.
Prof, I wanted to inquire if I could, in my stereotypical way, what's currently dynamizing, impeding, preoccupying, interesting you?
It's a great question and a really great day to be asking it. Um, I know you do have some Australian listeners, but they do constitute a small uh, percentage of your audience. I'll do a bit of explaining about the thing that is preoccupying me.
Mhm. Please do.
Um, so, in the longest running literary festival in Australia is called Adelaide Writers Week. It's a fantastic event. It is one of the very few free literary festivals in Australia. It is hosted in this beautiful garden in Adelaide. It's under the trees. People can come and go as they please. It's fantastic.
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful.
it
Yeah.
yeah, and it has been cancelled for 2026. And the Australian kind of literary community, the cultural sector is kind of dealing with the fallout from a number of absolutely atrocious decisions on the board's part. So it's meant to start in the first week of March. And last week, the board of the Adelaide Festival, sort of larger festival under which this smaller kind of festival sits,
Mhm.
announced that they were disinviting Dr. Abdel Fattah, who is an author who wrote a novel last year called Discipline. She's an Australian Palestinian woman, and they were disinviting her from the festival. The reasons they cited were ridiculous, and you know, uh, didn't make any sense, and they were really silly and pretty harmful. And I would say, they were defamatory in their nature,
Mhm.
in their reasoning. And as a result, 180 authors who were meant to be part of the festival pulled out, and some musicians have pulled out of the kind of larger festival. The almost the entire board has resigned. The chair of the festival, Louise Adler, resigned, and so it's sort of not going ahead for the first time, maybe ever. And it's caused like a lot of upset in Australia. And Louise Adler, who was the head of the festival, wrote an incredible article, a letter of resignation, which was published in The Guardian yesterday. And it really outlines like what's at stake here. Um, and for me, what is kind of preoccupying me is like not just this issue, which is of a piece of the last few years in Australia in the cultural sector, the way that Palestinian protesters and Palestinian people have been speaking out and then being kind of sidelined from events. Political interference in cultural events and that kind of stuff has
Mhm.
become really, really common in Australia. One of the things that is preoccupying me about this issue, though, is that people are talking a lot about freedom of speech. You know, the reason why we should boycott this festival, the authors have said, is freedom of speech. And I think that's great. And that's a reason to be, boycotting, is to uphold these ideas of freedom of speech. That's a great value. But I think what gets lost in the freedom of speech argument is the role of Israel and Palestine, the atrocities in Gaza in this argument, because that is actually at the heart of it. And so I think what's really interesting is the way that it can be these issues that are really rooted um, in this conflict. I mean, conflict's not really the right word because it's not two armies going at it. In this invasion, in this genocide, that is kind of sidelined for this other argument about freedom of speech, which is
Mhm.
very palatable to everyone. And so that's the thing that is occupying me. And I suppose the way that intersects with my work, not just because it is about book culture and it is about the publishing industry and what's happening. It's kind of around the way that we shape the narrative of culture and cultural ideas, and how it's very easy to kind of push one narrative aside for another and make everyone kind of feel good. And when I say everyone feel good, I really mean like white literary people. I don't think that Palestinian Australians feel good about this. I know that First Nations Australians do not feel good about this. But this kind of larger group, this dominant group, using the ideas of freedom of speech to kind of obscure what's really happening. And that, Toby, is what is preoccupying me at the moment.
I can imagine. I actually didn't know about this until Krishna Sen wrote to me on another matter and mentioned it. And then
Hmm.
I mean, these things are so weird and conjunctural, aren't they, to read Ms. Adler's piece that you
Hmm.
mention. I guess one of the problems with the freedom of speech argument is that it is historically going back to, Milton and The Spectator and all sorts of forms of literary writing and journalism from the English Civil War on, is that it's very much about occupied white terrain, and it's very
Hmm.
much about race and gender and class. I mean,
Hmm.
and sectarianism. So in
Mm.
Milton, there's no freedom of speech for Catholics. The area
Mm.
of Judaica is quite specific. It's about a Protestant sect. And the same with the early theorists in the early 18th century who wrote specifically about this being for white people. It's absolutely
Mm.
straightforward. And connected to that, of course, is that then it becomes almost an empty signifier. Whereas what you're suggesting, I think, if I understand you correctly, is that this is a very, very full, complete signifier with a very clear signifier that is now being obscured, namely
Mm.
Gaza. Have I got that
Mm.
understanding you correctly there, Prof?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I'm always I'm always a bit wary of when people talk about freedom of speech. Not because I have a problem with like that as a concept. I you know in I just think in practice it is kind of used as this container for kind of things that I don't agree with. And it's not that I want to limit people's speech, it's that I'd like us to be a bit more kind of careful about the way that we think about these things and we talk about these things. And who has the right to speak, I suppose is kind of at the heart of a lot of the things that I think about in my work. And what are the structures that um what are the structures that uh allow or afford people the kind of mechanisms for saying what they want to say, and what are the structures that limit that or hinder that is kind of, yeah.
And you've written about literary festivals and you've written about literary prizes,
Hmm.
both of which can be quite exclusionary, I suspect. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about that work.
Yeah, that I mean, I have written a lot about those two things and their kind of role as exclusionary. I started when I started my kind of research career, I was really interested in I thought I was really interested in the idea of inclusion. And it actually turns out that I'm really interested in the idea of exclusion. I don't really look at inclusion at all. Sometimes my work can be a bit like dark, but it's like, how are you all excluding people? How are these things
Mm,
excluding
mm.
things? And it's, I suppose, what is interesting about literary festivals and literary prizes is they're kind of mechanisms for continuing your career because as an author, because the kind of valuable commodity here is visibility.
Mm.
And um, and so at the very heart of these are PR exercises. And I don't say that as like anything derogatory. Like they're great. Like PR is fantastic, I suppose. But um, this is really about like for authors, this is about being visible and selling books, which is great. Um, but who gets to be on that stage and how those conversations are mediated, who gets to win those
Mm.
prizes and how we understand what a prize-winning book is. Um, they're presented to us as if they're kind of judgments made in a vacuum, and they're not. They're judgments that are made on the top of the pile that we've been working towards our entire lives. What is a good book? What is good literature? What is interesting? That's socially mediated. That's
Mm.
constituted. And
Mhm.
when you say that, everyone's like, yeah, of course it is. But then we go to a literary prize ceremony or we go to the literary festival, and that part of our critical faculty kind of falls out, and we all become very kind of excited about just this thing as if it's in a vacuum. And that doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that they exclude people, and they exclude people based on the um, structures that exclude people in every part of our lives. Like they're just sort of not immune from the systems that we're all a part of. Um, and the reason why that's kind of, oh, I was going to say dangerous, but I think dangerous might be a bit too strong. Like no one's in any danger. But the reason why it matters is because this is how authors build careers. And so ultimately, it is about what books are written, what authors are published, and therefore what ideas are communicated and supported. What ideas get from someone's brain into someone's school. That's why it matters. It doesn't really matter who wins a prize, really. What matters is the kind of it supports the system that helps to generate that. And that's kind of why I'm interested in them.
Now, in all of this, in what used to be called bookshops,
Hmm.
there was often a distinction between the category literature and the category fiction.
Uh-huh.
And you would find V.S. Naipaul in literature
Hmm.
and Lee Child in
Hmm.
fiction. So there's also an element of aesthetic hierarchy in
Yeah.
that sort of categorization. And I guess in festivals and prizes. I mean, is Lee
Yeah.
Child going to be invited to Adelaide Writers Week if it ever happens again, for example?
Yeah.
Is that a fair question to ask?
It's a great question to ask. And I mean, all of the systems of that structure the literary field, from my perspective, are about um, ideas of prestige. And some people care about that, and some people don't care about that. And if we think about that kind of literary side of the bookstore
Mm,
with the
mm,
quote unquote literature in, I'm reminded, my dad used to look at that and say to me, "Isn't it all literate? Like, isn't that all literate?" And I'd be like,
mm.
"Okay, yeah, okay, thank you." He found that to be quite a confusing label, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, I do too.
no, it's a funny distinction. But within that distinction, that's where the least amount of innovation is happening. That's where the like, and when I say innovation, I just don't mean innovation in form, but I mean like exciting stuff. So exciting stuff happens there, but that's not where new ground is broken. New ground is broken in genre fiction. I don't profess to be an expert in this field at all. I have colleagues here and at other institutions who are experts,
Mm,
but the questions around, let's say, race and representation or gender and representation um, in a category romance or in
mm,
crime
mm.
fiction is very different to the conversations, and that's with readers and authors and publishers and those and critics like tastemakers. those conversations are far more advanced in those areas than they are in literary fiction. Literary fiction is old, literary fiction is conservative, and if you ask anyone who is involved in that, they will reject that and say, no, this is the avant-garde. This is where we are pushing new forms forward. This is where we're experimenting. Okay, maybe, sure, but conversations around structural racism aren't happening there. Those conversations are happening at Mills and Boon. Those are
Yeah,
happening at
yeah.
Kindle Direct Publishing with, people who are self-publishing their romance books. The same problems that exist in any part of society around race and gender and class and disability happen in all these places, but the conversations are more advanced. The relationship between authors and readers is more advanced. Technology is more rapidly taken up in these spaces. And so, you know, they're just doing different things. The Booker Lee Child won't win the Booker Prize. Sorry, maybe I don't know. I'm not. I don't judge it, but that's not what's happening there. And what I think is really interesting is that there's no aspiration to be in the other place, and nor should there.
Many,
And
many years ago, Prof, the BBC in the United States used to ask me to read all the shortlisted titles for the Booker Prize and then
nice,
appear on television to explain what they were about.
beautiful, beautiful. That is public service broadcasting.
So
That's what the people need.
I'd
And
race
I know I
out and
sound
buy
really
these
negative.
things. I had to buy them.
I don't want to sound like I don't care about the system. I don't care about I read literary fiction as much as the next, white queer academic. Yeah, that is catnip to me. But so is like these questions around value and legitimacy and who gets to say what. Like that's the thing that kind of excites me because this is such an old and contested form. And it's slow and it's conservative and I don't, people say, well, why should we expect anything else? And I was like, well, because we deserve better. But the conversation's always going to be happening. Um, I think one of the things that I found when I was doing my PhD, which feels like 30,000 years ago, was that I was writing about gender and prestige and the sort of relationship between those two things. And the thing that I found was that over a 50-year period, which was what my study was, a 50-year period,
Uh-huh.
there was progress towards greater representation of women in these spaces of prestige building. And then it would drop back down. And those peaks and those troughs were characterized by active groups of women at the time who got together and said, this is bad, let's do something about it. And they did
Mm.
something about
Mm.
it. And then it changed. But then their lives got in the way and campaigning is hard and tiring. And so they went and did a different thing. And if they didn't have their sort of foot on the accelerator at all times, we just dropped back to this status quo of about 70-30. The prize winners are 70% men, 30% women, the literary festival stage, etc., etc. And so it's just characterized by these peaks and
Mm.
troughs, and that's fantastic. That tells us that like action works, but it also tells you that like if you are not constantly on this, then we have an equilibrium that
Yeah.
is not equal,
It just
that
keeps,
we'll find. We've got a baseline that we'll find.
yeah.
And then I was like, well, how is this happening with race, and what does this mean in terms of race? And I think that that's the thing has that idea has like animated my work. I was listening to an amazing podcast, not as amazing as this one, obviously, by the BBC called Anatomy of a Cancellation about the Kate Clanchy 2021 memoir
Hmm.
race cancellation. It's fantastic. It's a really interesting podcast. It brings into a lot of voices into like, I don't know, dissect the idea of cancellation and this book. And one of the experts they interviewed, a academic named Anamik Sahar, who's at Leeds, professor at Leeds, he said that the 2020-2021 period, there was a lot of attention around race in publishing, and that meant that there was more academic attention paid to it. There was more attention in terms of prizes and criticism and that kind of stuff. But also for publishers, there was this sort of attention around what their lists were like and how there was, inequality there. Fantastic. But now in 2025, 2026, the conversation has shifted And so people aren't talking about it as much. And so you see this go back again to this baseline of sort of just rigid inequality. And so it's not just in Australia this happens everywhere. Um, it's so interesting to hear him talk about it happening again. You know, race was such an important part of the conversation in 2021. Um, and the conversation has moved somewhere else. Now, the people who fought have been fighting for equality in 2012 are still doing that. Like they haven't changed. The industry's kind of eye has moved on
A
somewhere else.
little
And I
bit.
don't know how to make that
What used to be
change, but
Orange Prize for fiction, it's gone through
hmm
different iterations.
hmm
I can remember when it started, it being criticized because it was for women authors.
hmm
And then the longer it went on, the more it got criticized on the grounds that
hmm
this was once, first of all, it wasn't necessary. Then it was
hmm
something that had been necessary but was no longer.
hmm
And I guess one of the things with Clancy is that there, race was an issue, gender was an issue, and so was disability, right?
mm.
It's a big part of that. And as the desire for inclusivity and the power of exclusivity meet, there are these terrains of incredible struggle
Yes.
that keep happening. And as you say, for perhaps both sides, if I can make it binary, but certainly for those of us who want more inclusivity and less exclusivity,
Mm.
it's so tiring. That was something you mentioned earlier. And before we get on to talking about your fantastic book, I wasn't able to read all your work because I couldn't get hold of all of it, but I'd love to talk about white literary tastes, production, and contemporary book culture. But before getting on to that, I wanted to ask you about this question of exhaustion, if I could.
Uh, that's a really interesting question. Um, I think that I think that I think when sorry, I'm now a bit stumped. I think that it's about like pushing against the tide or like working
Mm,
against inertia. And I say this as like these are kind of these metaphors, similes. I don't know. Um, but I think that that is, you know, you're working against the grain, and the grain is
mm,
really rigid. And I think that's where this like white literary taste production comes into it.
mhm.
In that work, if I can like segue.
Yes,
So
please.
um I am really interested in race. I writing about and learning about race, and I was interested in the way that race was being researched in book culture.
Hmm.
And I felt that the my observation was like the one thing that we were not saying or talking about really was about like this um, the difficulty of shifting things. And why is it that it is so hard to shift? Why is change so challenging? Why is change so tiring? And the sort of idea that I stumbled upon, I suppose, I stumbled upon makes it sound like I didn't think about it. You know, the thing I came up with was this idea of a kind of a logic of white taste, and it is self-reinforcing. So every decision that the white Anglophone kind of structure. So this is in America, this is in Canada, this is in UK, this is in Australia, this is in New Zealand. Um, the entire system is geared towards white authors and white readers. Now, that's not my concept. That is really these are ideas that came from a lot of other researchers, primarily Annemiek Sahar and Sandra Van Lenter, who were working at Goldsmiths at the time. Um, they identified this kind of idealized reader. And from there, I kind of started thinking about this idealized reader and this idealized writer. And if we think about binary logics, you are one or another. And all of human classification, I'm getting into an area of study that I do not really understand. Biology is not my strong suit, but you are classified as a type or a subtype. And if we think about the literary field, um, we have these authors who are white men and these readers who are white women. That's a reader
Mm,
and a
mm,
writer.
mm,
And
mhm.
anyone who isn't that is a subfield or a subcategory of that. Now, I'm not saying that's right. That's the observation I have made, and drawn on from other people's work. So, because of that, we always default back to those two things. And if you want to do any work that either you are writing for an audience that is not that, or you are a writer who is not that, you are working against the grain. And you are working against an entire industry that has decided that, not decided, not consciously, that is structured in a way that pulls everyone towards that, pulls readers towards that, pulls advertisers towards that, pulls editors and critics and prizes. Where anytime you're not in these default two categories, you're working against that. And researchers that was done before me, like kind of highlighted the way that when authors of color came to particular publishers to, this is my book I want to write, they're being pushed into an idea of what that white reader would want, not what their own community would want, what that white reader would want. And so anything that kind of tries to get out of that system is a challenge. Um, and as a approaching middle-aged white woman, like I can see how the entire Australian book industry kind of caters towards me. I am that idealized reader. I'm in my 30s, I'm educated, I'm white, I'm middle class. This is for me. And so choosing a book's pretty enjoyable for me. And so I fit the logic, and it's easy when you fit the logic. It's challenging when you don't.
Can I ask you, and unfortunately, living in the global south, you don't have access to all these things, right? So I didn't get
Hmm.
access to your first book, which I guess was based on the doctorate. But focusing on
Hmm.
the one about white taste cultures, could you tell us a bit about how you went about your research, how you found this stuff out?
I mean, a lot of reading.
Mm,
And
mm,
I I am a real keen observer of literary prize culture. And so I am always looking at like what are these prizes doing? How are they functioning?
mhm,
Um, what's going on here? So really, it's just observation. If you spend enough time thinking and writing and reading in a space, you sort of start to see the things emerge. It's important that, like, to acknowledge the work that, the serious kind of thought that goes underneath what I've written. These
mhm,
ideas aren't
mhm,
just mine, they are pulled from range of sources. That's what writing is. But I think the value that my work has is that it takes these ideas and applies them in ways that they haven't been looked at. I'm a big fan of the Women's Prize, formerly Orange Prize, as a concept. Um, but man, there's a lot of like, I don't know, it it's easy to find things to criticize about that festival because of the way that it is just so. I think it's a really defensive space, and I understand why. As you said, when it was introduced, it was criticized for not being necessary. Now it is criticized for being no unnecessary. Like it's unnecessary in like different places. It's being
mhm,
delegitimized.
mhm,
Authors saying that's not a prize I'd want to win because I don't want to, there's no legitimacy in this, or it's not a real prize because men aren't writing and like whatever. Like, that's all terrible. But it means that it's become this like really defensive organization, and um, so it doesn't like to be criticized. I mean, the Stella Prize, same in Australia. It's a women's prize. It's a prize for women and non-binary authors. Um, Similarly, like is a defensive organization. I've written about them. I don't think that they either have no idea who I am and it's fine, or aren't big fans. Um, again, which is fine, but because because they've been set up in particular ways for promoting particular authors, they start as defensive. So when you say, why is everyone white? Why are all the winners white? What's going
Mm,
on here?
mm, mm.
Rather than engaging with that, they become really defensive. And that's the logic at work. We
Yeah.
all operate according to, I say we all, you and I operate according to this white logic because it exists in the literary field in the work that I'm doing, but when white people are called out for being racist, like that's that logic at work, that's that feeling of like, whoa, 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 that's not that defensiveness is that feeling.
One of
Yeah.
the things you do in the White Literary Taste book is towards the beginning talk about how desirous white liberals are of appearing kosher and decent and cool
Yes.
race. You cite a number of remarks by these institutions in favor of, more inclusiveness, getting back to what you were talking about earlier, in favor of supporting what used to be called civil rights cases and so on. There's a real
Mhm.
anxiety there, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what makes the publishing industry and like the kind of literary side of the publishing industry such an interesting case study for this. Like it's a lot of well-meaning white people. And that is a challenge. Overcoming that and enacting change in those spaces is a challenge. Um, and I think that the reason it's a challenge is because people don't feel comfortable doing like reflecting, and of course that makes complete sense. But when I think about the Australian media industry a lot, which is pretty bad. It's pretty bad in terms of representation. It's bad. And calls to change that, calls to transform that are many. They don't often go well, but like they happen and everyone agrees and everyone's nodding and everyone's like, yes, these things need to change. They need to change, etc., etc. Um, and but I think in the literary field, it just feels like no, 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 we're not like them. We're actually good white people because we care about books and ideas.
Mm.
Um, and so they can't mean us, or we are trying, or we're doing our best, or we have this diversity initiative, or etc., etc., etc. And so there is bringing about the change is challenging. But the other thing that I think is important to think about is that this white taste logic doesn't happen at the level of individuals. Individuals reinforce it. The actions they take reinforce the logic. But this is bigger than us as individuals. This is a system. And so while it's important to acknowledge the complicity of white people within the system, no one person will change it. No one decision, one publishing decision, one prize decision is going to change this. This is why it's like a wicked problem. I don't have an answer, which is bad. I tried to have an answer, but I don't know. I failed at that. And it's a bit rich, to stand on the sidelines of an industry and throw rocks. Um, but I don't know. That's the privilege of the academic, I suppose. I
Well,
don't know.
moving on to some of your encounters with different aspects of the industry, not at the general level, but at quite specific levels. I was thinking about my younger daughter, who is 10
Hmm.
and is a huge fan of printed literature.
Hmm.
Although she's 10, she is reading young adult fiction.
Hmm.
So she is devouring, and it's alarming sitting with her in some ways. I mean, we just had a 10-day holiday together, and she read 6 gigantic doorstoppers that
Wow.
are in these book series for young adults.
Uh-huh.
So as I said, she's 10. And at the end of the holiday, I asked her where she got her information from about these things. Does she read reviews? Doesn't know what a review is.
Yeah.
Does she see advertising? No. It's Pinterest, which I thought
Ah.
was fashion and makeup only. But Pinterest is the big thing for girls her age, anyway, finding out about books.
Hmm.
This fascinated me in the context of your work that I'd read about publicists and
Hmm.
publicity systems and the
Hmm.
role of so-called social media. So I thought, I want to ask you about that. And I wanted to know whether you were surprised that Pinterest was the point of reference for a
I
10-year-old.
am so surprised.
I was amazed.
I, this is what I'm saying. It's in the genre communities that they're doing exciting things. It's so interesting because I too have had the same opinion of Pinterest. This is what this is for.
Hmm.
I'm not a huge user of the platform. Big admirer, from afar, but because it sort of doesn't really have, um, yeah, that, well, maybe I should revise that opinion.
Have a look.
Um,
Have a
I'm
look
going to have a
at it.
look.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
moving beyond that, could you, oh, sorry, tell us a little bit
No,
about
no.
new forms of publicity for the book scene? Because you've published with colleagues about the labor of being a publicist, what it's like,
Hmm.
and you've
Hmm.
published about the use of social media to draw attention to books. So I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about that for us.
It's something I think about a lot. And um, I think one of the exciting things about um, social media as a way of promoting books is that it shifts the I suppose like intermediary role power of from
Mhm.
industry to people, and the idea, there's a lot of work that's coming out about book talk and how that's sort of changing people's reading or enhancing people's reading
Mhm.
practices, which is like really exciting. And anywhere where like readers are able to talk about the things that they love, I think is fantastic. That's really like a nice thing for me. And I think that there's not more readers who are communicating with their communities about the books they love. We just get to see it now. It travels in more places now. We have always talked about the books we're reading. We people, we just it's just done in different ways now, and I think that's really exciting. And the thing that excites me is about um, the ability for you to find out something about something you might not have found out about, that our reading worlds can grow. And that's fantastic. What is interesting though is that again, at that kind of literary end of the field,
Mm-hmm.
um, the the cultural intermediaries, the sort of tastemakers, the hold they have is the same. That hasn't weakened. There are fewer people who are able to do it because of uh, what's it called? Media advertising, the revenues associated with it, blah blah blah. So like there are fewer critics, there are fewer people in that
Mm-hmm.
in that
Mm-hmm.
world. But that is like those as institutions, the power they hold is still exactly the same. Um, you know, if you come back to prizes, to festivals, those kind of things, those are still sort of taste-making spaces, but they also kind of confirm those ideas that it's not coming from book talk or Instagram or whatever. They're not the people who are deciding what wins. It's these sort of
Mm.
judges. And so I think that's really interesting about how like what holds on and what changes. And but I don't know what's going to happen. It it is exciting, and talking about books is so fun. And that's why I think it works on social media. People want to do it. And
Yeah.
whether it's on Pinterest or it's on TikTok or it's on Twitter or X or whatever, it doesn't matter where it is. Like book clubs exist for a reason and they endure for a reason. And
Mm.
I think people love talking about books because you get to talk about ideas and what you loved and what you hated and how the book relates to you and the people around you. And that's fun. So and it always will be.
Now, another topic you've written about is the center periphery dynamic of publishing in the worlds that you're concerned with, and in particular in the Australian context,
Mm,
the fact that little publishing houses, I'm putting shudder quotation marks around little as I speak, and places that are not in the traditional cultural strongholds of Australia
mm,
tend to be very marginalized
mhm,
geographically, geopolitically,
mhm.
financially. And I wondered if you could chat a little bit about that research.
I would love to. So, together with my colleagues, Beth Driscoll, Kim Wilkins, and Sandra Phillips, we have been doing some research into community publishing in regional Australia,
Oh.
which is so different to the other stuff that I do, which is all
Mm.
about like things happening in big cities. And this research is really about, it sort of came from observing new publishing technologies, print on demand, etc., um, and how they are lowering the barrier to entry for individuals and small publishers to make books. And what is happening outside of these centres, and not just in other Australian cities, but primarily in small towns in Australia. What's happening? Who's making books? Why are they making books? What are they writing about, etc. And so we did a study with 4 different communities, um, working with their local councils and their libraries. Um, and we talked to people who make books in those communities. And it is so interesting and such a joy to talk to people who are making books in their communities. Because all of the things that I've been talking about, hierarchies, prestige, legitimacy, systems, exclusion, inclusion, that doesn't, that is not a factor here. Um, to these individuals and to these small groups because the impetus for publishing, for writing and producing kind of shifts a bit. It's less about prizes and reception and much more about communication, talking and writing for your community,
Mm.
telling a story that will enrich the people around you, that will represent the people around you. The focus is just small. And I don't mean that in a way that is derogatory or degrading. It's just different. And it reminds me of like why books matter, what books can do. Um, because we sort of use this idea of that's drawn from Indigenous epistemologies, primarily Mary Graham, who encourages researchers to, put place before inquiry. What is happening with the land? What is the place? What role does place have? And if you use that approach in looking at people who are doing different forms of publishing in their communities, you can really see the role of place and community and the people in this kind of creative and cultural pursuit. And then who's on the Booker Prize shortlist seems completely irrelevant. And it's not like congratulations to the shortlisted authors or all that kind of stuff. It's not irrelevant, but it just in those moments it feels like what we're doing here is communicating ideas at their very core, at this kind of very sort of essential level. And I might sound like I'm kind of bigging it up like it's some kind of noble pursuit. It's not always that. I want to write the history of my local theatre for my community. I want to write poems about the community I work in. I want to tell my story about living in this town for the last 70 years. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's about it's about community. It's about connecting ideas and stories to the community. And it's it's two-way, it's from you, from the individual to the community, and from the community into the individual. And that in its own way is like so wonderful. And so like, prior shortlists start to fade. They're kind of important start to fade.
Prof, I've got one last question for you. And once you've answered that, I'd like to give you the opportunity to add anything you wish. And that could take the form of something we haven't discussed at all, or it
Mm-hmm.
might be something that we have chatted about where you want to revisit. Does that sound all
Mm-hmm.
right as a means of bringing things to a close?
Perfect.
So the last question is slightly personal, and it's to ask how you got turned on to reading books and what books have meant for you.
Wow. Um, I don't really know. I I don't know, like a lot of people in like my position, like, I come from a house where reading was really valued. Um, and so I read a lot as a child and never really stopped. Um, my mum is a high school English teacher. I think that kind of helps
Hmm.
with those like the reinforcing of those ideas. And I just I think it's that this is a deeply unintellectual thing to say, but I think it's like the idea of escape. And I can escape into, you know, white woman who like lives in inner north of Melbourne and the life of her and her friends. That's enough of escape for me. I don't need to go to, other worlds.
Hmm.
Um, but I just like I think I am just entertained by it. I think as a system of entertainment, reading fiction
Hmm.
like is great.
Hmm.
I love movies, I love television, I love to be entertained. Um, so I think that it's just that's how it started. Like, and that's how it exists in my life. And then I am just deeply curious about why we read the things we read, why something is important. That's kind of where it started. And then once you kind of sort of pick at that scab,
Hmm.
like anything, this cultural studies podcast, like anything, like it just then it opens up and then you're like, oh, okay, fantastic. This is complex and interesting and there's dynamics at play and I can think about things through this level. I think because I take such a I don't know, juvenile approach to reading, I am able to read books, have fun, separate, and then do research and keep them in their own worlds. Because really it is about entertainment for me. And that's I wish it was more. It's not. Yeah. I'm just fascinated by it.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful answer because it means that you can remain very invested, very involved in something you're analyzing. You
Yeah.
don't lose the naive inquirer aspect of reading and
Yes. I mean, naive inquirer, that's me to a T, I I think that's an important part of my identity. But yeah, absolutely. I'm very lucky. Yeah.
well, one could say that, but it's a bit like the argument people make when they claim that their enjoyment of a genre, be it literary or otherwise, is diminished by critique. Whereas for many people, it can be emboldened, enlivened, enriched.
Yeah. That's me. Because if I finish a book that I love, I then have to read every single thing I can find about that.
Mhm.
Goodreads reviews, Instagram posts, criticism in a magazine. Like I need I need to create the book club in my mind, what's everyone saying about this? That's very important to me.
And now Pinterest,
Well, from now, yeah.
transforming
I
your
take
life.
all of my cues on what's cool from 10-year-olds. I'm not joking. Like I'm almost 40. I need to look to the young people and say, what are we doing? I have a 9-year-old nephew. He looks at me and says, Minecraft. And I say, I don't think so. But this sounds more like it's up my street. So
Could
that's
well
where I'll be
be.
going.
And Prof, to conclude things, is there something or are there some things you'd wish to add? As I said, they might be covering terrain we've already traversed, or they might be entirely new agenda items.
I don't think so, but I would like to know from you. Um, you speak to academics all the time. What's the thing that you've learned from doing this podcast that has like most impacted your intellectual life?
Wow. Well, it started 15 years ago, and then there was a hiatus for a number of years. And so there have been significant changes, obviously, in the technology of the podcast,
Hmm.
in my living circumstances. I was living in LA when it started, then in London, and then it stopped really. And when it restarted, I was living in Spain. And so that those things make quite a difference. And now in Mexico. So my interest in and receptivity to things has probably shifted. But the big thing for me has been that I've been able to meet virtually a vast array of people who've never heard of me and with whom I have no personal connection, but who are kind enough to share some of their ideas. And so that's been an honor and a privilege. But in addition to that, it's meant that I've done this research into their work before
Mm,
we've spoken. And that's just opened up a vast array of new things for me. So, I mean,
mm,
an example would be a recent podcast episode with a gal who works on drinking cultures, alcohol cultures in Britain, and girl power ideas associated with
hmm
going out,
hmm
but who also works extensively on feet,
Like feet.
feet, our feet, the two things that
Wow.
a lot of us have. And this was because she was a research assistant on a project years ago, but it's come back. There are new opportunities to think about it. And both these things connect to ideas about femininity,
Wow.
presentation and care of the foot, the presentation and care of the perhaps alcoholized self. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And how
Yeah.
girl, groups of girls protect one another against
Hmm.
predatory men in particular,
Hmm.
so against
hmm
shame
hmm
when they go out together.
Wow.
Stuff. And then the foot as this place where so much of our subjectivity is expressed.
Mm.
However complicatedly and however much that may be less obvious than
Yeah.
the girl culture thing. So that's just one example, but there are plenty where
That's so
gone
interesting.
into learning about somebody because of one thing they do,
Hmm.
and then learned about something else, something different.
hmm
And also because these people are from all over the world, they open up opportunities for me to rethink all sorts of
Yeah.
issues, all sorts of questions. And that's my slightly long-winded answer that
No,
it's
that's
really been, I
perfect.
mean, it's just given me new opportunities to learn things from new people.
Mm.
And just as you're
That's so
saying,
nice.
well, you learn things from 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. For me, I learn things from people your age because I'm 67 and I need the stimulus of newness, new approaches, and old approaches
Hmm.
come from others.
That's yeah. That's a great answer. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are the generations for you. Your nephew,
You. It's
my
me.
daughter, you, me. And I'm lucky. I have the 10-year-old and the 30-somethings, advising me about things. And that's not to suggest that there aren't people who are older from whom I learn.
Hmm.
Of course, there are lots of those too. And that's an exciting bit of it. By the way, the last two episodes of Desert Island Discs
Hmm.
I listened to were with Salman Rushdie and the aforementioned Lee Child.
Wow.
And
I'm going to listen to them.
they're both worth listening to. Rushdie is not pushed into questions about five marriages. There are
I
just
wouldn't dare. I wouldn't
there's the
dare.
there's the woman of the moment who, of course, is perfect and a great
Hmm.
influence on the great man, and so on. And then there are children who get mentioned en passant.
Yeah, it takes someone braver than me to ask that question. So,
No, quite.
I
And
mean,
or it may be that the great man just said, "That's we're not going there.
we're not doing that.
We're not
Yeah.
doing that today." Who knows what the great man said? But Lee Child is, I have to say, infinitely more interesting in
Lee
his.
Charles is a very interesting person. And I will now renew slash start my campaign for Lee Child to win a Booker. I don't know,
Good
so
one.
prolific, so many,
Well,
so
one
many books
one of the
that
things he
I've got to find
explains
one.
here, one of the things he explains in the podcast is that, sorry, the episode is that his younger brother now writes them.
That's
And
great.
so he said, he's 70, I think. He said, I'm just out of touch with lots of things that are happening. I have a 55-year-old or 50-year-old brother who's much more in touch. So they come out as, I think it's Andrew Child with Lee Child, but really the brother
Hmm.
does all the hard work. And he's fascinating about that, but he's also fascinating about his boring, awful, grubby parents and how much he resented them. And also how when he was sacked from ITV, right, where he worked
Hmm.
as some sort of producer, his revenge is that in his first few novels, all the bad people are named after the executives who got rid of him.
That's the dream. That's perfect. I'm going to get my brother to start writing my work.
Yeah,
He's not an academic, but you know,
perfect. Why not? I mean, there's an example for you. Anyway, what I'd love to know, Prof, if we can stay in touch, is if you do listen to these episodes of Rushdie and Child, what you make of them, because I found them both really interesting, but one much more interesting than the other, to be honest.
well, that's a good input. I will definitely listen because I am fascinated by both of those people,
Yeah.
um, in their own interesting ways.
Well,
People
thank
in
you
their
so much
corners.
for being with us today.
Thank you for having
I
me.
learned so much. And if at some point you'd like to come back to the pod, either solo or
Mhm.
with colleagues to talk about publishing or whatever, please let me know because it would be wonderful for that to
I
happen.
would love that. Thank you.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, you don't have much of it. I have a full day left, but you've only got a few hours.